I knew something was off when Clara Jenkins from HR knocked on my office door and whispered, "Hey, you forgot to initial the new non-disclosure agreement." I didn't. I never forget anything. That's why the damn company ran like a freshly oiled turbine instead of a flaming hoverboard strapped to a toddler. Still, signed the paper, handed it back, and went right back to translating legal jargon into code triggers for the $300. 0,000 Vortex Dynamics merger, the deal they kept announcing like a second coming at every town hall, but nobody actually understood. 12 years. That's how long I'd been at Nexus Systems. Not loudly, not glamorously. I wasn't part of the ping-pong table crowd, or the slackers who wrote long manifestos about company culture on our internal wiki. I was the person who made sure the merger protocols passed federal SEC tests, who built the quiet integration lattice between Vortex Dynamics' creaking legacy system and our own backend that had been duct-taped through 5 different chief technology officers. You know, the boring stuff, the critical stuff, the stuff they didn't even know they needed until it was broken, and I had to crawl in at 2 a.m. on Christmas Eve to stitch it back together. I worked on a salary, never asking for overtime pay or praise. I just wanted the infrastructure to remain solid. While the executives bragged about our corporate expansion, I was the person ensuring that our servers didn't crash from the sheer volume of customer data. I had survived 5 CTOs, each arriving with a new set of flashy buzzwords and leaving after realizing they couldn't run the core database without my guidance. A former CTO wanted to move everything to the cloud on his first day. Another wanted to rewrite the entire backend in a new programming language, and the third wanted to automate our security checks. In every case, I was the person who quietly pointed out the technical limitations and kept the business running. That morning, I had 3 monitors open, 2 half-drank coffees cold on my desk, and a post-it note that said, "Ask legal about Clause 9, circled in angry red. Behind me, the office hummed with the usual startup bravado. Project managers swaggering around like they invented time, developers arguing about programming frameworks, and one intern playing the same 30 seconds of a popular song on loop until I nearly stapled his headphones to the desk. And in the middle of all that, I sat there alone in my corner, reviewing the final compliance for Vortex Dynamics. My name, Walter Higgins, sat right there on the federal documentation. Third-party signatory, neutral witness, clearance liaison. I was the bridge. Nobody else in the company had that clearance. Nobody else even wanted it. The training alone was 6 months of red tape and a psych evaluation. It was like getting licensed to whisper into the ears of federal regulators. They gave me the power, then forgot they did. I didn't mind. I like being invisible. There's freedom in it. You get to build quietly while the loud people drown each other in buzzwords. I wasn't aiming for the spotlight. I just wanted my systems clean, my documentation tight, and my coffee uninterrupted. I took pride in my work, knowing that without my signatures and technical verifications, the company's financial transactions would grind to a halt. The only people who really noticed me were the ones who knew how fragile the entire setup was. There was the head of legal, and then there was Roland Vance in Vortex Dynamics Compliance Office. Everyone else just knew me as Walter in integration. Quiet, 58 years old, overdressed, over-caffeinated, underappreciated. I was a relic from an older era, before the company started hiring people who focused more on slide presentations than database integrity. Then Gavin Pierce arrived. Gavin was the new chief operating officer. He was mid-40s, all jawline and caffeine, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my 10-year-old car. He had that startup cult energy. The kind of guy who thinks synergy is a personality trait and refers to spreadsheets as weapons of disruption. He smiled too much, talked too fast, and called himself a fixer. I knew from minute 1 when we were introduced that we were already broken in his eyes. He spoke for 42 minutes straight at his first all-hands meeting, dropping words like agility, modernization, and legacy tech rot. People around me clapped like he was a guru coming down from a cloud. I just sipped my burnt coffee and opened my terminal, fixing a broken data bridge no one else even knew was failing. The Vortex Dynamics deal was supposed to close in 72 hours. My sign-off was the last step. Everything was aligned, 8 months of work. Back-end protocols, audit triggers, third-party sign-offs, cross-border data compliance all ready. Except I paused. Something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it yet. Not exactly. But I opened my personal folder, marked contingency, and double-checked the clause I'd highlighted 6 months ago just in case. Because here's the thing nobody at Nexus Systems ever understood. I didn't build systems for them. I built systems in spite of them because I knew someday they'd trip over their own arrogance and try to throw someone like me under the bus. And I wasn't going under. Not without a fuse lit and a locked door behind me. I wanted to make sure that whatever they did, I would have my own leverage. They say when a company wants to screw you quietly, they do it on a Wednesday morning with free bagels. That's exactly how it started. The email came at 9:13 a.m. All hands mandatory, 10 a.m. sharp, executive team introduction plus organization updates. Do not miss it. That's human resources speak, for someone new is in charge and heads are going to roll. At the meeting, Gavin Pierce stood at the front of the stage, under the bright lights, delivering a speech that felt like a sequence of slides generated by a machine. He spoke for 45 minutes about strategic alignment, workforce optimization, and getting rid of dead weight. He paced back and forth, gesturing aggressively to emphasize his points. The younger developers nodded along, hoping to get noticed, while the older staff sat in silence, recognizing the corporate code words for layoffs. I sat near the back, sipping my lukewarm coffee and checking system alerts. I didn't care about his buzzwords. I cared about the database integrity. There were boxes of bagels on the tables, but nobody was eating. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as if everyone knew that some of us wouldn't be here by the end of the day. 3 hours later, Clara Jenkins knocked on my door. This time, she didn't bring documents to sign. She brought 2 people from HR, one holding a clipboard and another with dead, unblinking eyes. Clara looked at the wall behind me instead of my face. "Walter, can we speak privately in the small conference room?" she asked. I knew exactly what that meant. They led me down the hallway like I was an infectious disease. There was no eye contact, no glass of water, just a manila envelope slid across the wooden table. Gavin Pierce didn't even bother to show up. He was probably busy updating his LinkedIn profile or talking about synergy in another room. The letter inside was 3 pages of corporate noise, talking about redundant roles and shifting core competencies. The clipboard lady looked at her watch and said, "Your role no longer aligns with our strategic vision. You will need to return your security badge and company laptop before 3 p.m. today." The other HR representative added, "Security has already been informed of your exit." I stood up, took the envelope, and walked out. I didn't say a word. I didn't yell or demand to see Gavin. But as I walked past the reception desk to grab my personal coat, something caught my eye. Right next to the guest log, taped flat against the laminate counter, was a printed color photo of my face. In thick red marker, someone had written, "Do not let him back on the floor." I stared at it for 5 seconds. 12 years. 12 years of keeping their servers alive, training 3 of their chief technology officers, missing family dinners, and logging in at 3 a.m. to fix database leaks. And now my face was taped to the desk like a common criminal. The disrespect felt like a physical blow, a cold weight dropping into my stomach. I could see the other employees looking away, avoiding my gaze like failure was contagious. My junior assistant, Toby Miller, was standing near the copier, his mouth open in shock. He mouthed, "I am so sorry, Walter," from across the room. I gave him a slow nod, walked back to my desk, and packed my few personal items into a cardboard box. I packed my favorite coffee mug, my old notebooks, and a few family pictures. The desk looked empty, cold, and sterile. The company had already moved on, treating me like a security threat. I looked around the open floor plan one last time, seeing the people I had helped for over a decade suddenly pretend I didn't exist. I handed my security badge to the guard at 2:45 p.m. There was no dramatic speech, no threat, just the quiet click of plastic hitting the desk. But the moment I sat in my 10-year-old car, my hands were cold and my heart was beating fast. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to calculate. I pulled out my phone and opened my secure personal database. As the certified liaison, the cryptographic handshake between Nexus Systems and Vortex Dynamics was tied directly to my personal digital signature and registered security profile. It was my individual certification, granted by federal regulators after 6 months of training and background checks. The system used this certificate to sign off on the data compliance transfers every 24 hours. I accessed the encrypted vault, navigated to the key store, and deleted my private key. It required 3 steps of authentication, each verifying my identity. When the final prompt asked if I wanted to revoke my clearance certificate, I pressed the button without hesitation. I didn't delete company files. I didn't write a virus. I simply revoked my personal security credentials from the handshake protocol. Without my valid signature, the automated integration bridge between the two companies would fail its next verifications sweep. The 300,000 merger couldn't legally close without that verification. They had spent months planning the signing ceremony, but they had just fired the only man who held the digital pen. I started the engine, backed out of the parking space, and drove home. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I just watched the road ahead, steady and focused. They thought they were streamlining their operations, but they had just cut the cord to their own life support system. I didn't even take my coat off when I got home. I just stood in the kitchen staring at the keys in my hand like they might dissolve if I blinked wrong. The house was quiet, too quiet. No Slack notifications chiming on my phone. No emails labeled urgent. No colleagues asking for a quick fix that would inevitably turn into 3 hours of unpaid overtime. There was only the ticking of the clock on the wall and the low hum of the refrigerator. The cardboard box containing my office life sat on the table like a dead weight. I looked inside, a coffee mug that said, "I void warranties," a half-used notebook full of network diagrams, and a tin of mints I kept for late-night server maintenance. 12 years of work fit into a single cardboard box. It made me realize how temporary everything really was. I went to the hallway closet, pushed past the winter coats, and dragged out my old fireproof file box. I popped the locks and flipped through the tabs until I found the folder marked contingency. I had put this together 2 years ago, not out of paranoia, but because I had spent enough time around corporate executives to know they would throw anyone under the bus to save a nickel. The folder was thick. I flipped past the organization charts and the security reviews until I found the original Vortex Dynamics merger protocol agreement. My name was printed at the bottom of every page as the certified third-party liaison. I turned to the compliance section and pointed my finger at Clause 9C. It was written in plain, clear language. The termination of the named liaison without a formal 30-day transition period and subsequent federal recertification voids the compliance status of the integration bridge and suspends the legal standing of the acquisition protocol. That was the first lock, but I had to build a second lock. The integration software itself utilized 3 distinct algorithmic modules that I had developed independently before I even joined Nexus Systems. I had licensed these modules to the company under a restrictive agreement. According to federal copyright law, specifically 17 U.S.C. paragraph 106, the exclusive rights to reproduce, distribute, and display that software belonged to me. The licensing agreements explicitly stated that the license was non-transferable and would immediately terminate if my employment was severed without a signed buyout agreement. Since they had fired me without a buyout, any continued run of the integration bridge was now a direct violation of 17 U.S.C. Paragraph 106, exposing them to federal copyright infringement. Furthermore, they had violated the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, commonly known as the Warning Act under 29 U.S.C. Paragraph 2101, by executing these sudden terminations of senior staff without the mandatory 60-day notice period. A formal complaint under the Warning Act would trigger an immediate audit by the Department of Labor, which automatically pauses any active corporate mergers involving federal clearance. I sat down at the table, the papers spread out before me. They had wanted me gone, but they had no idea that they had just pulled the keystone out of their own bridge. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was the direct line to Roland Vance, the compliance officer at Vortex Dynamics. "Vance Compliance," Roland's voice answered, sounding tired but professional. "Roland, it's Walter Higgins," I said, keeping my voice flat and calm. "Roland, good to hear from you." I was just looking at the automated verification dashboard. "We were expecting your final clearance token to register this morning. Is there a network delay on your end? We need that handshake to proceed with the Friday signing." There is no network delay, Roland, I replied. I am calling to inform you that Nexus Systems terminated my employment yesterday morning. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the sound of papers shuffling, then the quick tapping of a keyboard. They did what? Roland asked, his voice losing its professional polish. They terminated you? When? Who is your replacement? They gave me 4 hours to pack my things on Wednesday. As for a replacement, there is none. Gavin Pierce, the new chief operating officer, decided my role was redundant. This is a disaster, Roland muttered, and I could hear the panic starting to creep into his tone. Walter, your personal security certificate is hardwired into the acquisition protocol. The federal filing requires a certified liaison to oversee the data migration. Under Clause 9C of our agreement, we cannot accept an alternate signature without a complete 30-day vetting process by the regulators. If your certificate is revoked, the integration bridge is legally dead. The automated systems will refuse the handshake. I know, I said quietly. I already deleted my private key from the Federal Registry. The handshake will fail every validation sweep starting tonight. My God, Roland whispered. Gavin Pierce has no idea what he just did, does he? No, he doesn't, I said. I am sending you a formal notice from my attorney, Oliver Crane, stating that I no longer represent Nexus Systems. I wanted to give you a heads up so you don't waste your time showing up for the signing ceremony on Friday. Thank you, Walter. I need to call our legal team immediately, Roland said, his voice shaking. I hung up the phone, leaned back in my chair, and took a slow breath. The gears were moving now, and there was nothing Gavin Pierce could do to stop them. By Friday morning, the storm clouds were parked squarely over the Nexus Systems headquarters, and nobody had packed an umbrella. The merger signing was scheduled for 10 a.m. It was supposed to be a full executive suite event. Polished shoes, expensive ties, and legal briefs lined up like dominoes. The Vortex Dynamics delegation was supposed to roll in, shake hands, and sign the documents. But 10 a.m. came and went, and the conference room remained empty. At 10:15 a.m., Gavin Pierce stood at the front of the room, clicking a pen nervously. We are experiencing a minor administrative delay, he announced to the board members. We will resolve it within the hour. But he couldn't resolve it because 3 floors down, the office was already in a state of panic. My former assistant, Toby Miller, sent me a message on my personal phone. Walter, everyone is losing their minds. The automated compliance system failed its verification check at midnight. The bridge is down, and Vortex Dynamics is refusing to sign until the compliance issues are cleared. Gavin is telling everyone it is a temporary system bug. But legal is looking for you. They just realized your certificate was deleted, and they can't bypass the verification gate. Gavin is screaming at the developers to find a workaround, but they are telling him, it is impossible without your private key. The developers are refusing to touch the system because they are afraid of personal liability. I didn't reply. I just watched the drama unfold from a distance, enjoying the quiet of my home office. By noon, the General Counsel of Nexus Systems had discovered the copy of the merger agreement containing Clause 9C. He stormed into the executive conference room, slamming the door behind him. The news spread through the office like wildfire. Without a certified liaison, the merger was legally suspended. And then, our lawyer Oliver Crane delivered the final blow. Oliver sent a formal cease and desist letter to Nexus Systems' legal department. The letter stated that the integration gateway used by Nexus Systems contained proprietary software modules owned by Walter Higgins. Under federal copyright law 17 U.S.C., paragraph 106, Nexus Systems was no longer authorized to execute, modify, or run this software as their license had expired upon Walter's termination. Furthermore, the letter cited patent infringement under 35 U.S.C. 271, as the specific cryptographic routing protocol was protected under an active patent registered in my name. The letter gave them 24 hours to shut down the integration servers or face federal litigation. If they attempted to bypass the system, they would face massive statutory damages for willful copyright infringement, which could exceed $150,000 per violation. The letter also warned that any executive who authorized the continued use of the software after receiving this notice could be held personally liable for infringement. At 2 p.m., my phone rang. The caller identification showed the number of the Nexus Systems chief financial officer. I let it ring. He called back 3 times. On the 4th attempt, I answered. "Walter, thank God you picked up," the CFO said, his voice tense and high-pitched. "We have a massive misunderstanding here. This whole situation with your termination, it was an administrative mistake." Gavin Pierce went ahead with some restructuring plans without full board review. "We want to fix this. We can offer you a consultant contract immediately to sign off on the Vortex Dynamics compliance checklist. We will pay you $50,000 for a single signature." "I am not interested in a consultant contract," I replied calmly. "Walter, you don't understand," the CFO pleaded. "If this merger falls through, the company's valuation will crash. We are talking about 300 million thousand. The board is furious. We can offer you a significant bonus and reinstatement. Just sign the compliance papers today." "You terminated my employment on Wednesday," I said. "My credentials have been revoked, and my lawyer has already notified Vortex Dynamics that I no longer represent Nexus Systems. Under Clause 9C, the acquisition protocol is suspended. You cannot simply bypass the regulatory requirements, and you need to shut down the integration servers immediately, as you are running my copyrighted software without a license. Running that software without authorization is a direct violation of federal copyright law. If you don't turn off the servers, we will seek an immediate federal injunction to freeze all your data systems." "You are holding us hostage," the CFO shouted. "This is sabotage." "No, this is compliance," I said. "You chose to fire the only certified liaison in the company without a transition plan. You chose to use my proprietary code without securing the rights. I am simply enforcing the law. Goodbye." I hung up the phone. I felt no anger, only a deep sense of clarity. Later that afternoon, I opened my computer and registered a new business entity, Quiet Seal LLC. The process took 15 minutes. The purpose of the company was simple: compliance consulting and software licensing. I was no longer an employee trying to survive the whims of executives like Gavin Pierce. I was an independent entity, and if Nexus Systems wanted to use my bridge, they would have to pay my price. By Tuesday morning, the situation inside Nexus Systems had escalated from damage control to a full-blown crisis. The board of directors called an emergency session. There were no slides, no breakfast pastries, just red faces and yelling. Gavin Pierce sat at the head of the conference table, looking pale and exhausted, his usual startup confidence completely gone. The glass walls of the conference room did nothing to muffle the sounds of shouting. Before he could even speak, the lead investor, Gordon Finch, slammed his notebook onto the table. "Who authorized the termination of Walter Higgins without a transition plan?" Gordon demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Gavin swallowed hard and tried to defend himself. "It was a team decision based on strategic alignment and modernization goals. We were trying to eliminate legacy tech rot and streamline our operations. We wanted to build a leaner, more agile team for the post-merger phase." "You did not eliminate legacy rot," Gordon interrupted. "You severed the compliance artery of a 300,000 merger. Vortex Dynamics has formally notified us that they are pausing all signing proceedings. Their compliance team, led by Roland Vance, refuses to accept any alternate liaison signature. Walter Higgins was the only person with the federal clearance credentials. You fired the only man who held the key to the transaction. And you did it on a whim, without consulting the board. To make matters worse, a photo had leaked onto social media. It was the security camera image of my face taped to the reception desk with the words, 'Do not let him back on the floor,' written in red marker. An ex-employee had posted it on LinkedIn with a caption about how Nexus Systems treated its veteran workers. The post had gone viral, gathering 15,000 likes and hundreds of comments. Clients were screenshotting the post, and even the chief executive officer of Vortex Dynamics had clicked the like button. The comments were filled with tech workers sharing their own stories of corporate disrespect, and several major trade blogs had picked up the story. It was a public relations nightmare that was actively destroying our brand value. That afternoon, HR sent a desperate email to my lawyer, Oliver Crane. They offered to reinstate me with a double salary, a title promotion to Vice President of Integration, and full control over the compliance department. They even offered a signing bonus of $100,000. Oliver forwarded the email to me. "Do you want to respond?" he asked. "Tell them I am not interested in returning as an employee," I said. "But tell them Quiet Seal LLC is open for business." Oliver drafted a brief, formal reply. Walter Higgins declines the offer of employment. He has no further interest in serving as an employee of Nexus Systems. However, Quiet Seal LLC is available to license the integration software modules and provide compliance verification services. Our standard rate is $250 per hour, with a minimum 40-hour weekly retainer subject to availability. It was a surgical strike. I was no longer their subordinate. I was a vendor, and they had to play by my terms. They could no longer command me or treat me as a security risk. On Thursday morning, the final blow landed. Vortex Dynamics released an official statement terminating the acquisition. The statement cited unresolved compliance gaps and regulatory personnel discrepancies. The $300 million merger was dead. The news hit the wire at 7:13 a.m., and by 9:30 a.m. the market had reacted. Nexus Systems stock dropped 35% in a single day. The company lost millions of dollars in projected value. The board moved quickly to clean house. Gavin Pierce was fired by Friday afternoon, his short career as a chief operating officer ending in embarrassment. The chief financial officer resigned, and the company was forced to undergo a massive reorganization. I never went back to the Nexus Systems building. I didn't need to. On Friday morning, a courier arrived at my house and handed me a small velvet box. There was no return address, just a gold seal. Inside, resting on black silk, was a silver pen and a handwritten note from the CEO of Vortex Dynamics. "Next time, they will remember who built the bridge. Thank you for your integrity. Vance." I placed the box on my study bookshelf, right next to my old technical manuals and the corporate charter for Quiet Seal LLC. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the interim management team at Nexus Systems. They had shut down the integration bridge to avoid the copyright lawsuit. But their legacy servers were failing to sync, and their daily operations were grinding to a halt. They desperately needed the cryptographic gateway back online. The email was polite, respectful, and contained a signed agreement accepting the licensing terms of Quiet Seal LLC. I charged them 4 times my original salary rate to turn the key back on. They signed the contract within 30 minutes. Without a single complaint, I sat at my desk, holding a warm cup of coffee, and looked out the window at the quiet street. The corporate world was full of loud voices and expensive suits, people who thought they could replace the foundation while standing on the roof. But in the end, systems always win. You can ignore the quiet people who keep the machines running, but when the gears grind to a halt, you will always have to pay the toll. I was finally in control of my own life, and the view from the top of the bridge was beautiful.